Welcome to our panel on cloud security today. We're going to use this time, the next few minutes, to discuss cloud security versus on-premise information security. So our purpose will be to compare and contrast those elements of information security that are applicable to both and those that are applicable just to cloud security. First, we're going to introduce ourselves to you and give you a little bit about our backgrounds. I'm Ristau. I'm the CTO at DLT Solutions. I blog on cybersecurity, and you can find me on most Wednesdays on Cybersecurity Wednesdays. I have with me Scott Armstrong with Symantec, Lee Vorthman with NetApp, and David Blankenhorn with DLT Solutions. Scott, why don't you tell them a little bit about what you're doing at Symantec?
Sure. Good morning. My name is Scott Armstrong. I work for Symantec, where we help secure and manage agencies' information, whether it's in a cloud, in the enterprise, or even on mobile devices. In my role, I work on strategic initiatives across the public sector, specifically focused on cloud and cybersecurity initiatives.
My name is Lee Vorthman. I work for NetApp U.S. Public Sector. NetApp is a company that's really focused on data management and data storage solutions for the federal space, particularly for my focus. My particular role is focusing on how we can address cybersecurity across the federal space. So really an overlay in how we can help our partners and our customers address that within the federal area.
My name is Dave Blankenhorn. I'm the Chief Cloud Technologist here at DLT. I lead our cloud advisory group. As you can imagine, security is a major component of knowledge that we have to address in terms of how do we actually help our public sector customers leverage cloud technologies, public or private. So thanks, Vin.
So all of us here on this panel have been deeply involved in a number of procurements over the past 2 or 3 years with respect to cloud services. And the desire of agencies throughout the government to implement the cloud-first strategy. And we've seen requirements that differ from agency to agency. We've been through the pain of trying to normalize those requirements and ensure that we can meet them intelligently. One of the most interesting and perhaps useful actions to come out of the senior security policy-making groups within the government, that is NIST, and to some extent DHS and GSA, has been the establishment of the FedRAMP program. FedRAMP stands for the Federal Risk and Authorization Management Program. It took a couple of years to get going. It's now under the management of the General Services Administration. There are a number of companies that have been identified as authorized third-party auditors for cloud services providers, and it is the baseline for security compliance within the cloud computing arena. So thinking about it, how does it really fit into an agency's information security role? Who does what to whom? Who's responsible for what? How does FedRAMP approach that? Is it really the silver bullet that we would like to hope that we could get from a program, or is it still left up to the agencies to do much of the heavy lifting? And what's the equivalent? Is this something new and unique to clouds, or is this something that we've seen before in enterprise information security? David, you want to take that one? I know you've had a lot of experience with.
So we're going to hit FedRAMP right out of the gate then. Awesome. Okay. So I am, let's say, cautiously optimistic. I have pretty high hopes for what FedRAMP can bring to our public sector customers. It is unique to the public sector, so there is no real equivalent on the private sector space. I think the important thing about FedRAMP, I liken it to, the metaphor I like to use is, currently within our government, the way we issue the authorities to operate, the way that we put a service through the CNA or the ANA process, I liken that to if we were all to go get a driver's license and we wanted to drive in the United States, it's like we would have to actually get a license for every county that we drove in. So every single agency, every single service that we stand up has to have its own unique ATO. So if HHS has an ATO for a given service and DHS wants to leverage it, it's uncommon for that kind of sharing to actually take place. What's really unique about FedRAMP is it allows for a single library, a single collection of these security controls to be captured and then shared amongst all the agencies. So this is great because you don't have to start from ground zero every single time you want to put a cloud provider through the paces. You can actually pull that library, that system security plan, from the FedRAMP library, review the NIST controls that have already been reviewed, and then there may be some deltas or maybe some unique controls that your agency might have that you can then just address those with the cloud provider and accept the rest. It's not a silver bullet in terms of you can't outsource liability. You can outsource a lot of responsibility. At the end of the day, a CISO within the government cannot outsource liability. So they have to still put their name on the bottom line, but a lot of that pre-work has been done. A lot of the time it takes for us to put something into production will be significantly reduced because we're not doing an audit starting from scratch. So I have very high hopes for this. We've seen a couple of different cloud providers make it through this gauntlet so far. I know of a number of others that are in process right now. And like I said, I have pretty high hopes right now. But like I said, there's nothing really analogous to this in the private sector. There's no way for, say, one bank to issue their equivalent of an ATO and have some chemical company accept it. That's just not going to happen. It doesn't happen in the real world. So I think this is a great opportunity. I think it's an area where the government actually, this is an innovative program. It's going to have its road bumps, but I have high hopes.
Well, the security controls that are going to be incorporated in FedRAMP, are they going to be different from 853-3 or same as, or how's that going to work?
No, it's actually leveraging the NIST 800-53R3 controls. So there's no net new control objectives. What's interesting, though, is we're holding cloud providers to a higher standard than we do our on-premise IT. And by that I mean, in order to get a NIST moderate or a low level rating, you have to actually fulfill more control objectives to get a moderate through FedRAMP than you would as if it were an on-premise IT system. So we've set the bar a little higher for cloud providers, which I think is a good thing overall for the industry, but there are no new controls. The other key, though, is that this is a shared security model. So this is not something brand new. This isn't like we haven't been doing shared security models forever. We outsource our data centers, we outsource our admins, we outsource physical security, we outsource telco, we outsource a lot of things today. So this is not a net new thing, but the shared model and the opacity of the cloud providers will put a little slightly different spin on things.
Are we getting any feedback from cloud service providers on how well this process is going? Is it rolling along to the expectations, or are we getting different requirements from different agencies still that are hard to incorporate?
So it depends on how they're going through the FedRAMP process. If they're going straight through FedRAMP, then they're basically following the vanilla FedRAMP package. The controls that are laid forth for the different low and moderate levels. So there's no real net new there. Now, if the cloud provider is going through an agency, could be a different story. So let's say that a cloud provider is going through an agency, and the agency will ultimately issue an ATO on their own, but they will then turn that package into the FedRAMP body. There may be some slightly different controls that expand beyond the FedRAMP controls. in that package, but it'll just depend on how it gets through the process.
Excellent. Scott, do you have anything you want to add to that?
The one thing I wanted to mention is even though FedRAMP's relatively new, that you can still apply the risk management framework that NIST has that's 100% applicable to cloud computing to be able to look at what additional controls you might want to implement within your cloud environment based upon your own agency's needs.
Yeah.
And that's a key thing, so because there's no new controls, there's additional than what you'd see in the enterprise environment, but you still need to assess your own risk since ultimately it's your ATO and you're going to be responsible for it.
Your name's your CISO or CIO's name's on that bottom line.
Right.
Yep.
So the real value of FedRAMP to our agency audience is that it gives you assurance that there's been an audit, a minimum set of requirements have been met. There's documentation that's been prepared that you don't have to redo, and you have some expectation that the provider can and will or may, at some expense perhaps, impose additional security controls out of 853 that you may need.
Yep.
Lee, anything you want to add to that?
I'd just like to comment on a few things that David mentioned, particularly around that FedRAMP will promote sharing among the agencies. And I think that's an important step that's been lacking with some of the previous controls. And I think that's actually going to make it easier for both the agencies and the private sector to start adopting some of these security models as they move into the cloud. So I'm like David, I'm cautiously optimistic that this is going to be good for not only the government, but for the industry as a whole.
Super. All right, let's move on to the next discussion question. And now we're going to try to drill down into some of the issues that are perhaps unique in some respects to cloud, but may also show up in the virtualized data center environment. So shared resources is a potential issue with respect to both a data center that's consolidating, standardizing, virtualizing. We've all been through the situation where it has been difficult at times to balance the load requirements, the storage requirements, the demand from different groups within an enterprise that has adopted a consolidated data center, highly virtualized. So what are some of the issues that carry over into the cloud environment? Lee, you want to pick up on that?
Yeah, this is particularly challenging as you move to the cloud because, as you move away from kind of the enterprise model of siloed resources where each organization might have their own particular set of physical environments. When you move to the cloud, obviously that's moving to a shared environment, and so everyone has to share the same physical pool of resources. So that makes it challenging in terms of security because exactly as the listeners might think, you now have multiple users with different security requirements or different user requirements now accessing the same environment. So how do you protect that? I think the onus is going to be upon the deploying agency or the deploying customer to put in certain controls that not only segregate and protect the users within that physical environment, but also to make sure that they're meeting their SLAs and meeting the resource constraints of the environment in a way that doesn't affect security. So it's actually going to be pretty challenging, but there are technologies in place today, that NetApp has deployed, that our partners have deployed, that can help simplify this process.
Yeah, so what happens if a website that one of my business units is hosting gets a distributed denial of service attack? The one that's really on everybody's mind this morning is 300 billion bits per second attack on a data center in Europe. So how would that affect the other business units in my agency if I'm sharing the resources?
Yeah, and it's an important question. So the denial of service attacks are obviously challenging because they're trying to use up all the resources that are available in that environment. And really, I think the goal with cloud is to put the controls and the necessary security in place that limits the effects of the damages of some attack like that to the specific customer. So, for example, if you have, let's say some sort of enterprise cloud service and you have multiple customers using it, the hope would be that if a denial of a service attack hits that one customer's websites, that there's enough controls in place that limits the denial of service to that just one particular customer's resources. Obviously, if they attack the physical infrastructure, that's going to be challenging, but again, there are technologies and controls in place that can limit that damage to that specific instance.
How difficult is it, well, I know it's difficult because I've heard it discussed, but the optimum solution sort of eludes me. But from our experience, how difficult is it for agencies within themselves with different CISOs to confront the issue of normalizing their own security policies within a combined use cloud environment? Have you got any advice or observations that would be helpful in that regard, Scott?
Where I've seen it successful in agencies using kind of the shared resource model is where they put together a cross-functional working group that's got constituents from different components that are leveraging those shared resources. Because ultimately, typically from an agency level, you've got the policy that everybody should follow, but it gets tailored a little bit differently component by component within an agency. So typically, you've got to have somebody have ownership from each organization to be able to help contribute and help standardize and get that buy-in across the agency.
Yeah, it's going to require, in my view, a lot more collaboration among CISOs and perhaps some stronger top-down leadership and how that those issues are resolved and in a useful way. Any other shared resource issues? What about hypervisors? I remember in the early days of hypervisors, there was some problems with leakage, and problems with crosstalks and collision issues. Has all that been solved? No more problems with virtualized environments? David, you're
I think like any technology, we don't know yet. Well, I'm not aware of any major bleed sort of scenarios right now. That's not to say that there won't be. Like any technology, things keep cropping up, new ways of attack vectors start getting introduced. So I can't go out the line and say, yeah, I guarantee you that all hypervisors are good to go. I'm not going there. But right now, the technology has certainly stabilized over the last few years. It has matured considerably. It's not to say that those attack vectors don't exist. I just don't know that they've been exploited recently. It's a way of hedging around the question, I know. But yeah, I don't have a really good answer for that one. Like I said, it's getting better. But what we're seeing is that a lot of the big clouds, especially the public cloud providers, they're not using vanilla, which definitely changes the attack profile, the attack surface of those virtualized environments. So they're heavily modifying, heavily customizing those environments to fit their service, which will make it a little more difficult. And the bad thing is it is modified. So it's a chicken or egg scenario.
Right. What about keeping different levels of security storage segregated? Lee, is that problem pretty much resolved now in your regard?
Yeah, I'd say the technology is mature enough now. Obviously, again, like David said, we don't know what we don't know, but I'd say it's mature enough now that it's enabling these type of cloud environments. It's really the foundation to make it possible. NetApp just has been making a huge push towards clustered on tap, which is a kind of a federated shared storage pool to make these type of cloud environments even more possible and more secure. And likewise, our partners are deploying similar technologies to make that possible. So I would say definitely at the storage level, it's been fairly well baked at this point.
So I got to break the rules and ask a question.
Please.
So Lee, I guess the question I have is, I know the technology from a storage perspective has matured incredibly over the years, that we can actually safely do different kinds of security within the same storage infrastructure, even on the same disk.
Mhm.
Do you feel that what's the biggest inhibitor right now for customers to take advantage of the technology? Maybe an policy?
No, I'd say that the biggest inhibitor is, so obviously the technology is constantly changing, and the biggest inhibitor, particularly in our environments, is that, obviously these are challenging fiscal times, and so it sometimes becomes, very challenging for the customers to deploy the new technologies because they've already made investments elsewhere. So the challenge really becomes, how do you deploy these new technologies on existing infrastructure? And that's something that we've been working on, we're pretty good at, but, obviously, if the customers have questions about that, they can come ask us.
Yep. Okay.
So would it be safe to say, sort of in summary, that, or would you agree or disagree, that managing security in a shared resource environment in the cloud is not too dissimilar from managing shared resources in a highly consolidated data center that's conducting business across a large enterprise with virtualized resources, with multiple bureaus perhaps involved in different security levels?
I think there are similarities there. Again, the one big difference, especially from a public cloud perspective, is going to be the level of opacity that's going to exist below that abstraction layer.
Mm-hmm.
You're not going to be able to actually know exactly how that cloud is architected, all the software they're using, every single component. You're not going to be able to get that sort of visibility. So, whereas in the enterprise or within a private cloud environment, you have complete unfettered control over that entire stack. I think that's really the major difference.
I'd like to add one thing to that is, when you're deploying a public or a private cloud, within a private cloud, I guess the assumption would be that it's, the same organization or similar organizations that all have very good collaboration amongst each other. When you're deploying a public cloud, exactly as David alluded to, there's going to need to be this level of abstraction, or really you have to put some sort of automation in there so that the different tenants can go in and deploy and manage their own resources, and you don't necessarily need to have that level of automation within a private cloud.
There's probably some nuances from a policy and procedure perspective as well, whether it's for e-discovery or some other type of thing, how you're going to work your staff with a cloud provider in some of those scenarios or other incident response scenarios, because you're having to go outside your organization as well.
Yep.
Probably not dissimilar to kind of other outsourced relationships, but it's definitely a different process that people have to work through.
Well, so that sort of gives me a perfect entree into my third question, which is how much visibility should we have into security in the cloud services? I mean, should we require that our providers give us access to everything that they're doing? Should we require that they feed Cyberscope? Should we require that they make available managed security services on top, or how do we get that visibility that we said was there's a level of opacity there that ensures us that as consumers, as agency consumers, that the audit and the continuous monitoring post-audit is all working on a daily basis, moment by moment, as we expect. Any thoughts around that? How have we been seeing this entering into procurements?
All right, I'll take that one.
Okay.
I don't know about the procurement question, but I'll let you take that one.
I think that the continuous monitoring piece right now is still the big TBD, to be determined. I'm not seeing, especially on the public cloud side, again, where you have a third-party provider, they're abstracting everything below that API, web services layer. Those hooks don't yet exist into that underlying infrastructure that can report back to a DHS or a Cyberscope. Those hooks aren't there yet. I don't really know when or if they will be there. I mean, right now, the only way that we can safely use a cloud environment is we clearly detail in our contracts what the control objectives are that need to be met, who needs to address them, ensure that we've got third-party auditors have the ability to go in and audit those controls, audit the way the customer's doing, not customer, but the cloud provider's doing things. It's a trust but verify. But again, I think we need to also realize that that cloud platform is the intellectual property of those cloud providers, and they're going to be very, very tight about how much of that architecture and how much that secret sauce they're willing to expose.
Right.
From a software perspective, from a hardware architecture design perspective, they're going to be very, very tight-lipped about that. So we need to really keep it at the next level up, which is the control objective layer, and then again, trust but verify all of that. And most of them, you can bring in third-party auditors to come in and audit that stuff. And that's really what we have to do. The continuous monitoring, I think, is an area that still needs to be worked out, though. I think that's an area where there's still a lot of work being done, trying to figure out how we can get these public cloud providers to do this. Again, on the private side, it's a different story. It's kind of a business as usual for the most part for a lot of the contractors that are providing private cloud services. They're already providing typically traditional IT on-premise services anyway. So it's just simply an evolution of that model, but public's a whole nother ballgame.
I'd like to add to that if I can.
Please.
So I think what you're going to end up seeing when you have the cloud deployments is a contention, as David alluded to, between the cloud provider and what the end user, the cloud user, is going to see. And what I mean by that is that, so let's say that someone deploys a cloud environment and the government ends up using it, right? That deployed cloud environment is actually owned by that person that's deploying it. So let's say your favorite ISP. So they're responsible for that infrastructure. So they're going to have to put controls in place to manage their risk for deploying that infrastructure. So they're not necessarily going to want to give insight into those security controls to the end user because they're ultimately responsible for that infrastructure. They made investments. They want to make sure that it's providing security across the board to all those users. But that might not necessarily align properly with what the cloud user is going to want. And so that's where the challenge is going to be. And that's where I think, going back to the first question about FedRAMP, hopefully these type of certification processes can create these type of environments where the user can go out and say, okay, this is FedRAMP certified, or this is whatever, FISMA certified or whatever, and I've verified that and I've talked to the cloud provider and there's the right controls in place and I feel comfortable with this, and they've given me the level of insight and automation into the environment that I want, and therefore I'm comfortable putting and deploying my organization's processes on this cloud.
There's some nuances, I think, that we need to look at depending on the type of cloud environment, whether it's infrastructure, platform, or even software as a service. If you look at kind of infrastructure and the platform levels, agencies are going to be deploying their own software or other COTS software on top of those platforms. Potentially different cloud providers will have different SLAs around who patches what part of those systems and whatnot. So there's a case to be made that the agencies should also be trying to evaluate how to be able to do continuous monitoring of their solutions within those environments.
Right.
Because if you look at the stacks as you go up through the application, there's vulnerabilities there you've got to manage. You still have to take that into account with risks and any additional controls to be able to mitigate those risks. So that's where there's kind of still a shared responsibility there, and you can't assume it's all going to be solved by the cloud provider.
Right. That's a great point, because on the infrastructure as a service side, everything above that abstraction layer is the customer's responsibility.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So they have their own VMs, their own OSs, their own apps, their own data. They control all of that. And those are the same kind of governance risk compliance things that we go through on a regular basis with on-premise IT.
Mm-hmm. So
they'd be much easier to do the continuous monitoring for those sorts of providers. But again, understand that everything below the abstraction layer, you're not going to be able to get to.
So hypothetically, there might be a zero-day exploit on their infrastructure that we're unaware of, but we're responsible as agency consumers for monitoring the traffic from our web servers to some hacker somewhere who's trying to pull data out.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So the monitoring of the network of those resources that are communicating, very essential role of the consumer.
Mm-hmm.
Because even NIST, as we found out last week, is not above being a victim of software vulnerability, as the National Vulnerability Database found out, much to its chagrin. For 2 months, they had been had an exploit that was being taken advantage of, and a number of government websites were impacted. So it's not as if there is a perfect solution. We can only work through a layer defense in depth philosophy, risk management framework, and it's not easy, folks. I mean, it is very tough. It requires a lot of homework and dedicated people and automation. Every time you can think of how to automate something to reduce the sweat you have to put into actually doing this. So let's tackle one more question. There's a document that I'd like to alert all of our audience to, called the Challenging Security Requirements for U.S. Government Cloud Computing Adoption. This is a white paper that was released last November. It's very interesting in that it was a joint NIST, government and industry authorship, and it covers in some detail a number of the issues and more that we've talked about today, and what's being done in real time and how this is moving. One of the speakers that you'll hear later in this virtual event, Shamoon Mahmood, was on the committee that wrote this white paper, and I'm sure he'll have some insights to offer to you. But for example, the things that are addressed in this white paper include how do we do electronic discovery in the cloud? What are the privacy guidelines that we should impose in the cloud? The roles and responsibilities of the various cloud actors, visibility and control for cloud services, identity, credential, and access management, ICAM, with respect to cloud services, multi-tenancy risks, and continuous monitoring. So one of the aspects of continuous monitoring, which is very apropos for this discussion, because we're addressing continuous monitoring in the enterprise, we're addressing it in the clouds, we're addressing it as a collateral function in both spaces. We're collecting data with Cyberscope. Most agencies now are collecting some of the key data. The data that's really required at this point in time is asset inventory, system configuration, and vulnerability management issues. So how is continuous monitoring being tackled the same or differently in the enterprise and in the cloud, Scott?
Well, it differs agency by agency from what I was saying, and there's probably different levels of maturity from that perspective. I think probably at sort of a component level within an agency, people are very comfortable with doing asset management. They know what's typically there, the vulnerabilities and whatnot. What they're still maturing on is how to uniformly being able to share that information in a real-time basis, being able to share it up to Cyberscope, being able to consolidate that information across an agency quickly via standard-based ways. The technologies are there, but I think there's still a lot of legacy tools in place that are doing those sorts of things. I think from a cloud perspective, it's a newer environment, but it's also a little bit of a fresh slate. So as we do continuous monitoring in the cloud, whether it's being done by the service provider or an agency, there's the ability to start leveraging some of the newer tools and standard-based technologies that'll help provide the automation from the beginning in those environments.
Automation, once again,
Yep.
one of the key things we have to look for. Lee, you want to add anything?
Yeah, I'd just like to touch on that and a little bit of what we talked about previously about the degree of visibility into security in the cloud. And then I also want to talk a little bit about data management as it comes to continuous monitoring. So So first, when it comes to continuous monitoring, I think again, as Scott mentioned, there's really two aspects that I think cloud providers and the users are going to need to look at, and one is the cloud providers are going to want to obviously do continuous monitoring on their own infrastructures, right? And that might be a separate process from what the end user wants, which the cloud providers are going to have a challenge in making possible because they essentially have to deploy continuous monitoring type technologies as a service to these end users so that they can monitor their applications that they're going to be running on top of the infrastructure. And then the challenge becomes is how do you merge that together so that everyone can get some sort of value from those two processes. And I think that it's a necessary step we need to go to, but it's going to present the challenge. And what I mean by presenting a challenge is it's a problem that we've been working on at NetApp, which as you start moving towards continuous monitoring for all of this infrastructure and for all of these cloud applications, it's an enormous amount of data. And I don't think our users always consider this up front. I do a lot of engagements with customers where you start presenting, have you considered actually how much data this is? It might be hundreds of terabytes a day, and how are you going to manage that process? How are you going to age that data off? It's really actually a pretty big challenge, and I think as we move forward with this type of process in the cloud, it's going to be something that needs to be addressed and solved.
Right. You can't just store 100 terabytes a day.
Well, you can. It's just, I'll be happy to help you with that problem. But
you have solutions for that.
Yeah, of course we do. But obviously, again, going back to the challenging fiscal environments, it's cost prohibitive to do that, right? There's requirements from DHS that have come out that says they want to store 30, 60, 90 days of retention of data within their environments. That tends to get pretty big pretty fast. And again, while I'm happy to solve that problem, the reality is the customers can't always afford that.
Right. You need to extract the value from the data, big data techniques, whatever.
Yeah, you need to put some sort of processes in place that, what are your retention policies? How are you going to age that data off? What's actually important? What's not important? Again, there's a lot of architecting that needs to go in place before you can just, deploy continuous monitoring and get some value out of it.
This is clearly a place where you can't just throw bodies at it either. You have to automate this.
Yep.
You just can't throw more smart folks at it. With the amount of data we're talking about, you have to have tools that do it for you.
Automation.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a good note to close on. Anybody have anything they want to add before we time out here? Thank you very much, folks. We appreciate your attention today. And if you have any questions, feel free to give any one of us a call or an email as you prefer. Thanks.